Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Clark's. I'm your co-host, Javian.
And I'm your other co-host, Tyler.
And today we're going to be talking about some very important issues, as typical here at the podcast, the Coffee and Clark's podcast. But we're certainly happy to be back. We've been off for a few weeks because of some major life developments. We'll get to that in very, very shortly. But before we get to today's topic and the events that's going on in our worlds, let's first talk about a little bit of coffee, shall we? So, Tyler, for today's episode, what are you sipping on?
Yeah, so I got a bag of beans from a local roaster in DC. It's called Small Plains Coffee, and it's the region is single origin from Ethiopia, and the flavor notes are jasmine. Sorry, I got the bag here, so I'm reading it. Jasmine, peach ring, and lemon curd. Um, Pretty good so far. When I first tried it, I bought the beans like a week ago. You could really taste the jasmine, like jasmine tea, and it caught me off guard a little bit because I was like, "Oh, it's just too much like tea flavor." But since then, it's kind of changed over the week and has gotten a little bit. That tea has gotten a little bit more subtle, and it's less like in your face. So that's been nice. So
Awesome.
it's been pretty good though. What about you?
Awesome. Nothing wrong with a little cheat sheet there. So, so I've been drinking two beans, and the first one that I had yesterday, I want to talk about because I just ran out of it. It's a whiskey infused dark roast, and it is very potent. Not in terms of like its alcohol content or anything like that. It's just like it's super bold. Like it really hits you, and when I first open it back, like it's just like the smell just like washes over you more intensely than like the normal coffee beans. But today I just literally cracked open a oh, well, I should have mentioned that the whiskey infused is by a company called Black Dog out in South Carolina. But so the new bag that I'm drinking today, new beans I'm drinking today, is from, of course, my favorite, Perks Coffee. This is I've never had this one. This is their Perk Up coffee. It's a blend. So it's a medium roast. It's a nice blend. I just cracked open the bag maybe like 10 minutes before we started recording. So it's really fresh. It's I've had only maybe 3 or 4 sips of it so far, but so far so good. It tastes really refreshing, and it's very light. So excellent. I had to do it on my French press this morning because I realized I was out of coffee filters
Nice.
for my Chemex. So today was a French press kind of day. So yeah, that's what I'm drinking. So all around.
Nice.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Cheers.
man. Cheers.
So on the podcast, we've been away for a few weeks, and one of the main reason is Tana and I both have been like really busy with work and different projects and stuff. But more importantly, Tyler, and I'm gonna give him the floor. Tyler has been very blessed with a growing family.
That's right.
So Tyler is now a father, and he has a new baby boy, him and his wife. So congratulations to Tyler and his wife Allison on a new baby boy Oliver. So tell Tyler, I have no idea. I'm not a father, and that terrifies me to be completely honest. So tell me, like, what's that experience? It's been a few months now, but what's that experience been like? Because in some way, to talk about like our topic, which is we're going to be talking about like adversity. This is the good kind of adversity, but it is somewhat adversity trying to figure out your life and your schedule and how to manage a new life, literally, that you're responsible for. So could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. Um, I think everybody talks about things to prepare for before the baby is born and things to read about and mentally prepare yourself. But there's really nothing you can do to prepare yourself for that moment. It kind of just happens, and then you hope that you are equipped with the tools necessary to kind of carry out and keep this baby alive, so to speak. But I will say my wife Allison has been tremendous, and it's amazing what females can do, particularly giving birth. That whole experience is a whole conversation within itself, and just gave me even more respect for women and what their bodies are capable of doing. So with that said, as well, um, there's a saying. It kind of has like two different ways: adapt or get lost,
Mm.
or adapt or die. And I've been thinking about that over the last 2.5 months because he's not 3 months yet, but 2.5. And really, it's true. I mean, you have to adapt to the changing circumstance. So in my case, right off the bat, it was the lack of sleep. And I mean lack of sleep, like this kid's feeding like every like hour and a half, 2 hours, and so he's up and diaper changes and all that kind of stuff. And so really, the first, say like 6 weeks, you're not really sleeping much at all, and it's pretty rough to be honest because you're functioning at maybe 25-30% of your capability, which is very difficult. And so I think being able to understand that you're going to have to adapt the ways that you did things. You could still do those things, maybe activities that you engaged in, but how you went about it is going to have to change. It's literally like a puzzle piece. Like every day, it's like, okay, this is what I have, and then how can I fit my stuff around his schedule? It's something that you and I were talking about earlier. Is his schedule changes every week based upon like, oh, 2 weeks ago he was going to bed at 7:30, 8 o'clock. Now he's going to bed at like 6:30, and so figuring out, okay, I can get this done before then, this and that. It's incredibly complicated at moments. You have to stay on top of it. But I think teamwork is crucial. I feel like my wife and I have been doing a really good job of tag teaming and communicating with each other and letting each other know when one needs to tap out and needs to get out for a second to get a breather and vice versa. As well as just knowing that, like, for me personally, she's like, hey, I know exercising is a thing you're really passionate about. Like, go and do that. Like, I know you need to do that. And then when you come back, you can kind of take over. But I think in general, it's taught me a lot about patience. The fact that, what you see in him, he's got the same needs and wants that we do. He just has a harder time expressing them.
Hmm.
And maybe sometimes too, it's like the fact that like he actually expresses his needs by crying right now, whereas like some of us adults, we don't actually express what we need. We just like keep it in. So it's kind of
Mm.
like, yeah, and it's cool to see him
It's deep.
grow. Yeah, it's cool to see him grow and um, being able to now like he's starting to be able to grab things and pull
Hmm.
on things. Like this morning, he like grabbed his pacifier out of his mouth and like held it, and I was like, wow, that's really cool. So, yeah, it's been a great experience. We're very, very fortunate that everything worked out from the birth. Mom is healing great. I mean, nothing wrong on his end. He's healthy. He's feeding good. He's doing all the things he should be. So it's really great. And I think, um, in general, yeah, I would say if you're hesitant about having children, you really need to have a talk with yourself about it. Because people will say like your life changes when you get married. No, I didn't really change that much. It changes when you have a child. That is for sure. And I think the biggest reason is because your time is not your own anymore. It is given up. Like you have to be willing to sacrifice things for that person, even more so than your spouse. That's at least one of the biggest takeaways I've realized.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's impressive. That's a TED talk on its own.
Oh, please.
Yeah. No, that's great. And you had mentioned some very profound things that you know I never really considered. So certainly that's true. And you're literally going through it, these past few months. So seeing that shift, and we've had some conversations off camera about how things are going, and kind of seeing like that switch go off. It's been kind of, at least as an outsider looking in, it's been kind of cool to see you go through that, and how you're managing not just this new life in your hands, also like with your job and the responsibilities with that. And so absolutely, and this is part of, I guess, a good segue to kind of like our topic today. So, one of the things, we talked about that, or at least one thing I wanted to talk about is like how to deal with adversity when it strikes, because at some point we're all going to face it, some on a larger level than others, and but I think at some point, whether it's facing issues in your playing or facing adversities in your job or career, facing adversity in your life, is how do you handle those situations? And obviously, depending on the situation, it's going to be unique. But if let's, since we're talking about, you have this new life, let's maybe expand to like how do we face adversity in our lives and in our playing careers. Let's just say careers in life. Let's marry those two ideas together. Um, so I've shared this story with you, and I might have mentioned it on this podcast about when I went through some like serious adversity, and this is a story I share all the time with my students and people who ask. Sometimes I give them a abbreviated version of the story, but when I was in grad school, I'm sure I've talked about it on here, but I had a very very tough time. I was having serious issues playing, and and once that happens, because unfortunately, as trumpet players, or probably most musicians, or most people who are super focused on a career path, you see your value of yourself through the success or failures that you're going through each day. So, as I was going through this really really tough time, I did not know how, at the time, I didn't know how to handle it. And then my whole like mental state just took like a nosedive. I was in a very, very dark place. And this, in this year that this took place, this was like the very first time that I had serious doubt about what I was doing and my plans for my life. Since basically high school, my goal was to, play trumpet, and I wanted to teach at a college. I've known this since at a fairly young age. And this year was the first time I seriously doubted myself that I'd be able to do this. So, well, maybe I don't have what it takes. But it kind of took me through a dark place. So, for me, that was my adversity, and trying to figure out how to handle that. For me personally, to deal with that, I just kind of removed myself from the situation. I was very fortunate that I was able to do that. I mean, everyone may not have that opportunity to kind of shift gears and remove yourself from that environment or that place. But I was very fortunate, and in doing so, in many ways, it was like I could breathe again. It's like, oh, now I'm at a place where I'm happy. I'm at a place where I feel supported. I'm at a place where I'm familiar with my environment.
Mhm.
And then I could get my mental state together, which then affected my physical state.
Yep.
This is around the same time where I went through this whole this whole like health, physical health improvement. I lost a lot of weight. I started working out. This was all part of my transformation and figuring out where I want to go from here. You know, that year is kind of like rock bottom, and in many cases, it really was. I was really, really struggling, and so for me, that was my adversity, and I feel very fortunate to say I got out on the other end of that. But in the darkest days of that time, I honestly did not think it would happen.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned too, I think a couple of things you can pull from that is you're able to step back. And I think that's something that is really important when you're in the thick of it, is being able to kind of have a bird's eye view of your situation. Because a lot of times, particularly in a college, university setting, you're just in it all the time, and it's hard to see the big picture, global perspective. And whether that just be like, what am I doing? Am I growing? Am I getting better? Or to your extent, like, okay, what is actually going on here? Like, how is this situation, this environment affecting me? Is this the best thing for me right now? And then how do I move forward? And so for you to be able to do that and take that step back, one, allowed you to have a better viewpoint of your situation, but two, allowed you to pivot, right? So you're able to take a situation like that and almost flip it upside down and use it to revitalize yourself, right? You not only change your direction of where you went for your doctorate and the career that you have now, but it also changed your value system. It changed your relationship with the instrument, changed your relationship with your career, also changed your relationship with eating and exercising, right? So it's like out of this bad came so much more good, you know? So if you can have that kind of perspective too, and I mean, you and I can echo it, it's extremely hard. And sometimes it takes other people to do that for you. I think that's something that's really could be really beneficial is having somebody that's not in the thick of it with you be able to provide perspective because they can kind of see things from a different lens. And I think that is really, really important. Just like if you and I were to catch up and I were to talk to you about things that I'm going through, you're probably going to be able to say, hey, calm down. Like, you know, here's the information that I'm gathering from you. Here's the big overall perspective. You're going to be fine. You
Hmm.
know, but it really takes having friends or colleagues that are supportive and understand you and how you work, but also understand your situation too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because I had a few friends as I was going through this. I had some good friends who kind of like would talk to me about different things. And there's one of my good friends who I'm still friends with. He's also a college professor now teaching. And I don't know if he remembers this conversation or not, but he said something to me that will always stick in my head. And it's a very simple thing, but as I was going through this thing, as I was having all this self-doubt, he said something. He was like, know your worth. And that was all he said. And to me, for some reason, him saying that to me, maybe saying it to me at that particular day, at that particular time, just like really clicked with me. And from that moment, I was like, oh, you're right. I can do better than this, and I could be in an environment that's better for me. And from that moment, I was like, all right, I got to make a change. And there's something else that our teacher, Dr. Christopher Moore at FSU, always says. And like when we're like in a lesson, or I don't know if he ever said it to you, but he's definitely said it to me when you're like really like stressed out, you're trying really hard to like learn this stuff, or you're stressed out, maybe you're having a bad playing day or whatever it is. He will always just say like, man, it's just a trumpet. It's not that serious. It's like it's just a trophy. So I understand that our goal working on this is to work on our craft each day, but like at the end of the day, it's just a trumpet, and do with that as you may. And that kind of brings perspective back to what you're doing. It's just a trumpet. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think our culture and society, I mean, I was thinking about this like the last couple of days in a book that I'm reading. And, you know, in our career specifically, we're technicians, right? I mean, we are so hyper focused on doing one thing really, really, really well. And you can get lost doing that. You can lose yourself doing that thing. And it's unfortunate um, that a lot of us have to go through that to make a living, to do these things, because most people don't. And and yeah, I think it's important to remind yourself that, like you said, you're more than just playing your instrument, and also that you have other skill sets that are potentially untapped, and to really, a lot of times too, in those dark moments, um, those other skill sets you tap into, right? Like you working out and you're dieting and all these things, like you're able to like tap into those things that were already there. You just now had an opportunity to realize it and give attention to those things. Whereas before, your attention was directed to this one thing in general, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I found for myself in the seasons that I've been going through is being able to look at myself and be like, wow, like this is just an aspect of what I do, and I could put this away and never touch it again. But I have all these skill sets now to use towards other
Mm-hmm.
things, which is way more important than just like, all right, I'm going to be an expert in one thing. Um, and, another thing too, I was listening to a podcast with Matthew McConaughey, and he talks about false peaks. And I think this really hit me when winning this job. I was thinking, gosh, yeah, I was thinking yesterday, I was like, one of the worst things that ever happened to me and one of the best things that ever happened to me was winning this job. And the reason being is because when you're practicing for an audition, whether orchestra, military band, every day you're going for perfection. And at some point, that's going to break you down. And at some point, you're going to say, well, if I had perfection and execution in this audition, then I need to be able to do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that has wrecked me. That has been one of the worst things that has ever happened to me. And that is something that I'm working on breaking because it's not realistic. Like to go out every day and expect perfection from yourself is just not, it's not healthy. It's going to literally drive you insane, drive you to injury, drive you to dystonia, drive you to a slew of things, right? Um, but also with that, Matthew McConaughey talked about false peaks. And so we think, particularly in music school, if I get this job, then things will line up. And this goes hand in hand with adversity. Or if I get this military band, or if I get this orchestra job, then boom, I'm here. And all this is false peaks. Because we get here, and then we get hit with adversity. Or something happens, and we're like, but I thought when I got here, like that wouldn't happen. I wouldn't experience X, Y, and Z. Again, it's false. Like none of that is true. And I think that's something that needs to be taught more is that the goal is that you're always going like this,
Mm-hmm.
however slow it may be in your personal development, right? And yeah, you might have highlights along the way, but those aren't the peaks, right? The peaks it's never ending. Like you'll never ever truly reach the top, the peak, so to speak. But these little moments of glimmer that you might have, we get so fixated on it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
somebody getting that tenure, like that's it, boom, I'm good. And it's like, no, it doesn't stop there. It's like you could get tenure and then you might go in the darkest period of your life afterwards, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you just never know. And so I think like we have to reshape and almost expect adversity. Like it's going to be there regardless of how much success you have in your personal career or whatever it may be. And that's the other thing too. Like we try to separate or we look at like what we do and how we do it as like the peak, like our job, like again, going back to this identity thing, but it's like, no, like everything that you do influences one another. Right. And so it's like you mentioned, it was like once you were able to emotionally kind of get back to even, right, you notice how that affected your physical health.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's true. In this other book that I'm reading right now, it talks about how the emotional stresses affects your physical performance. So I don't know. This topic of adversity is interesting because every time you go through something, there's always something to be learned and to be gained. And I think honestly, it makes you stronger. I mean, it's like the saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But really, it's true. I mean, it's like you learn more about yourself. You learn more about your weaknesses, your blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, usually that adversity will hit you in a place where weaknesses that you have in your growth and development can toughen up and get stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've never heard of this idea of like the false peak, but it's very, very true. Like as you were talking, I was thinking about when I got my current position here at Valdosta State. You get the job, you're really excited. It's like, all right, great. I'm in the job. This is all what I've been working towards all these years, and now I have the job. And then for me personally, what I experience is like after having the job for the first few weeks and learning how to manage like practice and teaching and playing the orchestra here in Valdosta, I was really struggling. There was some time, especially my very first semester, really my first year. Granted, COVID happened, but in that first semester and a half, let's just call it that. I was having like some like issues because I'll be in a teaching a lesson, and like I am dog tired, right? After like teaching, and you're trying to model something for your student, and you're not getting the response that you're capable of, or it just won't happen today. And then you feel like in some ways a failure, because it's like I expect to play this section of their solo at a very high level at all times, regardless of the situation, because I got the job, therefore I am great, right?
Right.
And that's just not the reality, and I've had to accept that about myself, and then also find ways to kind of manage my playing and lessons to where I'm not so tired, so early in the day, or what have you, trying to find that balance as we've always talked about. But I've started, and even to this day now, I'm still figuring out that part of the job, because there are days where you expect to, well, let me put it like this. I remember I had my first faculty recital here at VSU. And let me tell you, it was the most nerve wracking performance I've ever given in my life. And that's because I put all this pressure on me, to like play this recital like exceptionally well. Like this has to be recording quality well. Like there can't be any misses. And like I remember like being sick. Like I woke up slightly sick that morning, and I was like, "Oh no." And like I was just like not feeling well at all that entire day. Even when I got to the recital, I was lightheaded. I was like, I wasn't sure if I should even do the recital. That's how bad it got. But I think a part of that is because I like built all this anxiety in my body mentally, that it was manifesting like physically in some ways. And after the recital, I had to do some like quote unquote soul searching. Like, why do I feel this way? Why am I putting this much pressure on myself? I'm not perfect. There's going to be things. There's always things, right? And you kind of have to let that go. So for me, facing that kind of adversity is an ongoing thing, right? Accepting that it's okay. You're going to have some failures along the way. That's part of life. That's part of having a job. That's part of what we do, and being okay with that, right? We got to let that part of ourselves in some way die a little bit, and being okay with just being who you are. So yeah, I've never thought about it as a false peak, but that's certainly what I was experiencing at that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and to echo what you said, this is actually something that Jan Kagarais has been working with me, particularly in my retraining process. Um, so what you said right there, you mentioned that it's almost like this. You've built something up, right? And it's all psychological, because at the end of the day, the students really don't care. Like they're going to continue living their life. But what happens if you get a different job, and it's like maybe slightly, the brand might be a little bit different,
Right. Right.
uh, quality of recruits a little bit different. Does your expectation of yourself go up? Now it's okay. Well, I got some pretty studied, kids coming in. Now my expectation has to be like I really know my stuff, right? And it's like
Mm-hmm.
before you know it, every single thing you do, oh, I'm giving a recital at ITG with this title on it, right? It's like all of a sudden, like you're creating this false image, this narrative of yourself that you have to be this thing. And I remember Jan, there were two takeaways. I remember I was really frustrated, and I was like, Jan, things aren't working. Like I'm just getting so mad. And she was like, you don't have the luxury to be frustrated. You have a limited amount of energy every single day that you choose to put where. And so right now you're putting all your energy into being frustrated, and none of that is helping you retrain. All that is doing is shutting the body down from learning. And so you're going in this cycle of not learning and just getting frustrated. Or you can take that energy and put it somewhere else, into learning and to just letting go. Again, she says like you're a perfectionist, and you got to have that, you got to take that monkey off your back, because until you do so, you're not going to be able to learn and actually meet and get your full potential. And this is another thing too. One of her assistants said to me, "This is like a week ago or so. He's like, yeah, it still feels like you're trying to prove yourself to people, and to feel that like you have to show people your value. He's like, you don't have to do that. Like nobody's asking you to do that, you know. And I feel like when you're in school, you're constantly trying to prove yourself. When you're in a new job, you're constantly trying to prove yourself, prove your value to people. There's no need to do that because all of a sudden now you're realizing you're giving all this energy to other people, to other things. And those people are going to go at some point from their positions and jobs. And it's like, what are you left with? Again, it kind of goes back to, in some way, that's people pleasing. You're trying to please those people. And you say, well, of course, I'm trying to get tenure. I'm trying to do these things. But then are you making decisions that are best for you or making it based upon, well, that person probably thinks I should do these things, therefore, right? So then the dialogue shifts a little bit. But
Right.
anyway, just to kind of echo what you were saying, because, yeah, the manifestation of thoughts, I mean, is absolutely true. You can literally make yourself sick, you know, by thinking tons of negative things. And so that's been something that I've been really thinking about is catching a thought in the act and choosing how much value I give it, choosing to either diminish it or really like keep that going if it's positive.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. Uh, I couldn't say it any better than you just said. Yeah. So, so in terms of like, obviously we're talking about facing adversity. If we're thinking about in terms of when we meet something, when we're practicing or we're working on a skill, what, in your experience, what's the best way to like face that issue? Like when you are having like a serious, let's just call it crisis in your playing, like
Yeah.
what do you think are some of like key points, maybe just a few that you think are probably the best way to go about handling those situations?
Well, I've been going through that for like the last year and a
Yeah.
half with my
Yeah,
injury.
you're right, right.
And I think for 6, 8, 9, 10 months of it, have not dealt with it very well, to be honest. And I think a lot of that is I'm too
Mm,
emotional in the negative way. And so I let my emotions dictate how I feel. I let my emotions dictate my learning process. And so I think when adversity or frustration comes, I think one, it's good to assess, like you mentioned, your energy levels, right? Again, it's funny, this came up last week. So I emailed Jan and I was like, hey, when I get to my third or fourth session of the day, just things don't work. Things just shut down completely. And I'm like, but I'll go and play later and everything's fine. You know what her advice was? Skip it. Your body is probably in a low energy setting. And so it's just not available to learn. So just skip it completely. And I was thinking, my natural instinct is to plug along and try
yeah.
harder. And hers is to do less.
Do less. Yeah.
And I'm like, as an athlete, that makes total sense. Like
Yeah.
you give yourself that break if you go in and you're like, I'm probably not gonna be able to push as much as I usually do because I can feel that I'm tired. But when it comes to trumpet, whoa, we can't do that.
Whoa, now wait, what are you saying?
Whoa,
Don't practice?
yeah, like whoa, and so I said, okay, let me try it the next couple of days, and sure enough, it's worked, and it's like wow, like this, people don't really talk about that, It's like we kind of view ourselves as just being able to do it. Yeah, this conversation came up in my head yesterday in my run. It's like we view ourselves as like just being robots, being able to do it on demand, but by doing that, we lose the human element of like, we're humans. Like there's going to be this
Yep.
every single, like you look at like a year progression, you look at a day progression, there are ups and downs,
Yeah.
and yet when it comes to playing our instrument, like we have no forgiveness for ourselves when that happens. I get frustrated. I get angry because I'm like, well, it was here yesterday. Why isn't it here today? So I think the first, going back to the original question is, if you're feeling, check yourself emotionally, and then ask yourself, why are you feeling those emotions? I think one of the great things too in this learning process is practicing from a state of observation. So it's almost like you're watching yourself practice and you're observing what's happening, right? I'll do exercises with Jan, and we'll do this thing, and she's like, we'll do single tones, and she'll be like, all right, next one, play the next one, play the next one, play the next one. And sometimes she'll be like, oh, you're thinking about that note that you played that you missed, 10 notes ago. And she's like, so these last 10 notes, you weren't actually focused at all. And so they were kind of just passing. And it's been super eye opening for me because I realized like how caught up I was in perfection, right? And how that stirs up different things. You try harder, you try to make it work, you manipulate, you do things so you can get the product that you want in the moment. But over a long term, viewpoint, vision, and path, it's very detrimental.
Yeah.
Now I'm realizing now how much manipulation I would do to get something to work in the moment, and it's just it's terrible. It's toxic, and it's very unfortunate. Again, back to the original point, I would just say, first, I think you need to start off and check yourself emotionally, see where you're at, understand why you're feeling these ways. Like, make a list, like, sit down, put the horn away,
Hmm.
because if you're in that emotional state, you can't learn. Like, you're literally, your body starts to shut down. Um, and so, yeah, I would take a step back and then really, really like look at yourself in the mirror and say, why am I getting frustrated? Is it because I'm putting pressure on myself because I have a studio performance and I care about the presence of my other colleagues and I care about their opinions? Or maybe I had past success and right now I'm like in a little bit of a lull. Like,
Hmm.
all these things, like asking yourself that. I think the other thing too is, like you mentioned, adversity comes in waves. So it's to be expected. But I think the other thing too is some adversity is harder than others.
Yeah.
And so realizing the state that you're in, realizing that yeah, I mean sometimes adversity lasts for a week, sometimes it lasts for years. But I think the most important thing is if you can come away being a better person, having grown through it, or developing new skill sets to equip you for future adversity or adverse moments. Like that's what it's about. Like those moments aren't to destroy you; they're to make you stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we've said before, it's how you handle those situations that determines kind of where you go from there. Because at the end of the day, we're all going to face it on in various ranges, but we're going to face it at some point. Professionally, in our personal life, it's going to happen. So, and I think what you said about like checking yourself emotionally to me is so important. Because as I've talked about, like your physical health is directly related to that mental health. So whenever I talk to students, and you mentioned something very interesting about like you're striving for perfection, and then it costs all these other issues, right? And I recently, like last week, had a conversation with one of my students who really struggles with like performance anxiety to the point where it's a physical reaction where he can't control like like the tremors in his setup. And he was just mentioning something like, when did that all start? He said, well, I started in high school, and I had made all state the year before, and I thought I was doing really well, I was progressing. And then my senior year, I auditioned for all state again, and then because I had this title, when I went in for that next audition, I couldn't handle it because I built up this pressure on myself. And ever since then, in a performance or an audition, I can't handle that situation because I've put all this pressure of perfection essentially on myself, to now I can't, almost not quite function in those situations. And we've talked about, okay, well, the obvious things that you have to let that go. Granted, that's harder said than done, right? So we're working on this same idea. When you were talking about when you were working with Jan, it's about like letting that go. No one's putting that on you but yourself. So as long as you accept your flaws, I think that's like the first step in the right direction, right? And then we go from there, right? But yeah, it's certainly an important issue because again, we're all going to face adversity, and as I've said, like it does come in waves, and you were mentioning something earlier, and it made me start thinking. I have this like conference that I'm performing at in like a week from today, actually, or I guess 2 weeks from today. And I'm going to be doing some like a little tour leading up to the conference at a few universities in the region. um, and as I'm preparing for it, I'm trying to be really mindful of how am I going to feel in the moment, and not trying to put this extra pressure on myself of like, oh, because I have this title, therefore, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So, because I want to be in the moment where I'm free, that I'm liberated of that. Right. And one things I talk about is when I got my first job out of college. I was a assistant director of bands at a college, and to me, that year was probably the most liberating year in terms of my profession that I've had, because I was in many ways removed from trumpet, and my responsibilities was conducting and running a basically a band department. And what I came to find is, like, in the performance, I had no anxiety. I felt free. I didn't feel pressure even on the podium, even though I'm responsible for keeping the group together and making some musical decisions. I felt very free the entire year. It's the most fun. Some of my most fun musical experiences came in that year because I didn't have all this extra pressure on myself. And to me, I'm trying to get to a place where I feel like that when I'm playing. And sometimes I do, but in quote unquote high pressure situations, I haven't figured that out yet. And that's for me the next step. How do I get to a point of feeling liberated as I'm performing? You know?
So one of the things that Jan mentions a lot is obviously like she's very big into the thoughts that you think, right? And so when you're kind of going back and forth between you want to feel this liberation, but then at the same time you feel this title, and so you kind of have two separate paths. And so I would ask, like, if you were to break it down to a percentage, like how often do you think about each one, and in
Hmm.
what relationship, and then what emotions are triggered by each thought. One of the things that she mentioned too is, she's had a lot of success with her students. She
Hmm.
was like, yeah, I mean, when they got to the performance, like this is the thing that we're working on right now, is getting into flow state when
Hmm.
practicing, which you can't have judgment when you're in flow state. You can have observation, but judgment, no. And so as we're working and getting into that place, it always starts with everything you do prior to even playing your first note on the horn. It's the
Hmm.
setup before. It's, are you stressed? Like, what emotions? Like, what are you bringing to the table? Because all that affects how you play. Is your mind racing, or are you calm and collective, right? And so being able to get yourself to that point before even playing your instrument, and by getting into this flow state, I've had probably the most like focused practice in my life, even though I'm playing literally single tones. But there's been so much focus there because everything else around me, I'm learning how to silence. Or when I get sidetracked, I observe it. I say, okay, I'm off right now, or I'm thinking about this thing, and I bring it back. And before, I realized how much of my practicing was like I would think about things that I have to do or this and that. And it's like
Hmm.
you're actually not in the moment. And so she
Hmm.
said her students lived that way. They practiced that actively so that when they got to the performance, it was just playing music. They weren't thinking about who's in the audience or this or that because they had trained themselves to get into that flow state. So this was just, oh, the same exercise, but in just a different situation, different environment. And that takes a ton of practice, particularly if you're not used to it, and a ton of awareness to be able to understand when you're off and when you're not. And so one of the cool things that her assistant does with me is say, okay, for the next few minutes, you're going to do this exercise. And then you're going to break from it and say, what percentage was my focus of attention on the task at hand? 75%? Okay, observe it. Then go back and do the exercise and say, okay, what was my focus of attention on? Whether it be like, okay, I'm just going to go for sound on this flow study. And then you take a step back from doing the line. How much of that was I focused on the sound? And it's kind of eye-opening if you're being really honest with yourself, because sometimes it could be like, wow, maybe 30% of the time I was actually focused, and sometimes
Hmm.
it's the opposite. But I think this, what I'm learning from Jan, is a missing ingredient that was never really tapped into. It was like we can read books about it. You can take beta blockers. You can do all these things to kind of manage it, but to really have ownership of it. Like this is literally a practice within itself. You have to practice this within the practice room. And you have to know what to focus on, and you have to like know yourself, like know thyself, know that like I'm a better learner in the mornings than in the evenings. So I expect my focus of attention to go down as the day goes on. It's why my best practice sessions are in the morning because I'm very
Hmm.
focused. I have less distractions, you know? So, yeah, that's kind of like a different.
No, that's great. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. Yeah, and like you said, that definitely helps deal with adversity. And it's more like having the tools to use when you do face these different situations. And
Exactly.
yeah, and I think that's what this whole episode is about, because as I've said before, like we're gonna face it, and it's about finding the tools and developing the tools so you have them at your disposal when you do face these situations, because we will face them. It's just a matter of time. If you've been very fortunate to this point to not face any situations, you most likely will. But yeah, that's I. This episode has kind of turned into a nice little therapy session in many ways.
Yeah, I think
So
this is, we focus in so much on like the technician part of what we do. And while that is great, and you could probably teach, you know, an animal at some point to press down valves and to do these things, there's a whole, you got to remember, like, as the lips come up, or as the mouthpiece comes up to your lips, there's a human being playing this
hmm.
thing with thoughts, emotions, feelings, and all that comes through. All that energy comes through the instrument, and whatever you're feeling, all that stuff affects it, you know. And that's why we
Hmm.
say like, oh yeah, my performance is usually less than the practice room, right? And there's a reason for that, because typically when you're in the practice room, you're more relaxed, you're more calm, you
Hmm.
care less about judgment, right? You're more in a state of observation from time to time. But as soon as you get in the performance, you think, crap, I missed that first note. And then where's your focus on? The first note
Yep.
that you miss, as opposed to the next phrase.
Yep.
You know, that's why we're always amazed by people that, like, man, you didn't get caught up, you know, when you flustered or missed that lick, and you just kept going. Your focus was there all the time. We seem to admire that, right? We see that in athletes all the time.
Yeah.
You know, somebody threw a bunch of picks in the first half, and in the second half they came back, and it was like, you know, we like that because it shows this discipline. It shows them not getting rattled, and it shows them that they're not going to allow negative things to derail them.
Right. And I think we also like that because everyone has that moment on different spectrums, right? Where they feel like something and they're not able to handle, the outcome of that. Maybe it continues to affect their day. But to see someone, like, using the same analogy, someone throws three picks in the first half and comes back in the second half and throws like five touchdowns, we respect that because we've all at on some level have experienced that and may not have had that kind of success, because we all say, man, it's amazing to have some level of failure and then turn around and have great success, like, and it's very admirable.
Yeah, and then the question would be, well, what's your relationship to failure like?
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, I mean, again, it goes back to like our brain. There's a book that it's like the brain doesn't. What is it? The brain or something keeps score. The body keeps score, right?
Oh
It's about
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah.
And it's about trauma, which is very
Hmm.
real, right? And so that's why, like, when we make a mistake, the body remembers that.
Hmm.
But it's, do we choose to let it fixate on that, or do we choose to let it focus in on something else? And that's something that takes a lot of discipline. That's something that I'm trying to work on now in my current practicing, is like really just observing how I feel, being understanding that like it's going to have the ebbs and flows. Some days are going to be better than others, um, and to really like, how good can I focus in on? Like, can I really focus in 100% or 99%? You know, what does that take? What kind of awareness do I need to have? And then before you know it, it's like things start to, they talk about like you get lost in time almost. Like you get so fixated. And I've experienced this running before where it's like the body is doing, right? That's eventually the goal that we want to get to, where the body just happens and you're just in a state of observation, right? It's very
Hmm.
Zen like, but it's very true, where it's
Yeah.
like it's just kind of happening and you're just kind of like observing it. And you're like, oh, this is cool. Like
Yeah, that's cool.
you're not actively thinking like, oh, I got to do this. Oh, I got to play soft here. It's like
Yeah, you're.
you're just doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I can still. So there's this when I was an undergrad at FSU. Um, I remember this. I will always remember this performance. It was actually for a jury, and I was playing Hummel second and third movement for my jury, and I can remember going into that feeling great. And I remember playing this solo and just having this outer body moment where I was like, I could do anything I want to do right now. And like I have full control of this performance. And like it was probably I would say like the most liberating. I use this word liberation, but it was the most liberating performance I think I probably still have had to this day. To where I'm like I'm so in it that I'm just like if I want to go here, I can go here. If I want to go there, I can go there. If I want to play soft, I can play soft. If I can play louder, I have full capacity of what I want to do, and I'm just like enjoying it the moment, and it was a beautiful thing, and I'm trying to recreate that as often as I can. But yeah, it's when it's there, when you have that and you can recreate that consistently. That's the end goal right there. Yeah.
Right. And then the question would be, okay, so what did you do prior to that that led to
Hmm.
that thing? Because I'm reading another book called Peak Performance, and it talks about, people saying like, oh, I had this magical performance, but it was like a one-off thing. And it's like,
Right.
no, like you can recreate that. It just takes time and it takes understanding the things that are involved to make that kind of thing happen.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a very, very real thing. And it's, again, this is kind of a path that I've been on the last few weeks and really trying to understand this because I think it can get lost. I think a lot of times, again, we focus in on external things, jobs, success, technical things, but we focus and we don't focus enough on the emotional, mental side, physical side too of playing and what comes
Hmm.
with that because that affects everything else.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, man, this is kind of a deep dive here today. Well, it's like a welcome back deep dive.
Yeah.
Um, so we're going to leave our adversity topic for now, but I think based on our discussion today, we can probably come back around to this because it's a forever growing of ideas of how to deal with it and based on professional life, personal life, our playing and all the things that we deal with on a daily and weekly basis. So we might at some point revisit this topic if people are interested in. But we're running a little low on time, so before we wrap up, let's do something a little lighter, much lighter. Uh, so this topic is what are we listening to? So Tyler, what have you been listening to recently?
I don't know if this is lighter, but Debussy.
Well, yeah, I would
Yeah,
say so. Yeah, impressionists. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I've been listening to a lot of impressionism and that playing it for my son, and
Oh,
it's very peaceful. It's very nice. So I actually haven't been listening to too much music. I've been just reading a lot and listening to some podcasts and a sports talk show. That's kind of been filling my ears at the moment. I think I go in waves
mm-hmm.
at times. I think another too is I'm reassessing the things that I digest, not like food
Mm-hmm.
wise, but the things that I consume and how it affects me.
Right.
So that's another thing that I'm kind of taking a step back and really saying like, okay, are these things actually helping me move me in the direction that I want to move in from a personal standpoint? So,
Right.
but yeah, I've been listening to a lot of Debussy, which is really nice. I have a deep appreciation for that kind of music. What about you?
So one of my students well, my students like to kind of put me on new stuff or stuff they think I haven't listened to. Most of the time, I've already listened to it. I've not only listened to it, I've like done reviews and that
Yeah.
kind of thing on it. But one of my students, he put me on Kenny Garrett's new album called "Sounds from the Ancestors."
Okay.
It's a jazz album. Essentially, yeah, there's a little bit like jazz fusion, but it's mostly a jazz album. It's actually really really good. It's pretty mellow. I mean, there's some like free jazz stuff in there, but for the most part, I felt it's really relaxing. You know, it's has a lot of funk and groove in there as well.
Hmm.
But it's really mellow for the most part. And I really really enjoy. I've listened to it twice now. I like to give an album two listens uninterrupted before I like give it a true opinion.
That's fair.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I've listened to it twice already. And I really like. I would recommend people check it out. It's on Spotify, or if you want to purchase it, yeah, definitely purchase it. But Kenny Garrett's "Sounds from the Ancestor." That's the album I'm listening. Well, I just finished listening to the past like week and a half or so. So that's what I've been listening to. Good stuff.
Awesome.
Great saxophone
Yeah.
player. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Play
yeah,
with
yeah.
Miles.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah. So before we wrap up, I want to thank you all for listening. We're back. We're going to be trying to get back in the groove with our schedules changing. Um, but before we go, we want to make sure that, or to remind everybody to follow us on Instagram, Facebook. Please subscribe to us on YouTube and Apple Podcasts. You know, like us, share us, give us 5 stars, all the things. If you are a teacher, you know, send this to your middle school or high school students. If you are an undergraduate or a graduate student, you know, send our videos to people that you think would like us. It doesn't have to be all trumpet players. I think one of our goals in doing this was to not be so trumpet centric. We want to, kind of open this up to all musicians, because we think the things we talk about are things that all musicians deal with on some level. So like us and send us to all your friends, the people you value. And you can follow us personally. You can follow me on Instagram at nerdyprof on Instagram and Javian Brabham on Facebook. Tyler's still on his social media hiatus, but I think if they want to send you questions or if they have more questions for you, how can they contact you?
I guess
Good
they could
question.
send a question to like the Coffee and Clarks, and you could relay it.
Yeah.
I do have the Facebook Messenger app on my
Okay.
phone, so if they send me a message through that, it'll give me the notification.
Gotcha.
Um, Other than that, you got to try to find my phone number.
Yeah, so maybe send them a request or just a message on Facebook Messenger. That's probably the
Yeah.
best way to do it. All right, well, we want to thank you all for listening again. This is Coffee and Clarks. I'm Javian Brabham,
And I'm Tyler Duncan.
and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.